71-year-old woman finds diamonds worth $400,000 in her plaster cast. Caroline finished arranging the bed in her guest bedroom, which had been her son Xander's room when he lived there. He was coming to stay for a few days, so she wanted everything perfect. With that thought, she decided to check the closet, as he often left clothes in there, but they would probably require a fresh laundering since it had been more than a month since his last visit. But as she rolled to the wooden door to the side, her eyes squinted. Aside from a few clothing items, Caroline saw something white on the floor. Her back creaked a little as she leaned to grab it. Surprisingly, it was the remain of her old plaster cast. 6 months ago, she broke her leg and used a cast for a long time, but it was taken off a month ago when Xander had stayed for a few days. She remembered his words, telling her he would throw it off. It wasn't the kind of thing you would keep unless you were a hoarder. "Yuck," Caroline said, shaking her head in disgust, then rolled her eyes. Despite her disgust, she grabbed the cast only to be shocked by the weight of it. "Jesus," she said, lifting the thing with both hands. She might as well have carried her leg. It was too heavy. She threw it on the bed and frowned, realizing why. It wasn't empty. There were Ziploc bags inside, but Caroline didn't understand. She carefully took out one, and thousands of sparkling lights reflected around her as the sun shone from the windows. When her eyes adjusted, she saw the truth. The bag had diamonds. Relatively big ones, it made no sense. There were at least 5 Ziploc bags hidden inside the plaster cast. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, putting the bags back inside and grabbing the cast. She hugged her chest and rushed to the living room where her phone was. She sat on the sofa, placed the cast beside her, lifted the handset, and pressed 911 slowly. "Hey, Mom!" Her son Xander's voice distracted her as he let himself into the house. She lifted her hand, asking silently to wait while someone from the emergency line answered. 911, what's your emergency? "Yes, I found something weird in my house," Caroline began, looking cast beside her. "It's so weird. I have no idea how it got here. It's a..." She felt the handset being pulled off her hands and saw Xander's fingers end the call. The older woman stared at him in shock. "What are you doing?" "Are you insane?" Xander shouted. "Why are you calling 911? "Xander," she reproached his tone, "I found a bag of diamonds hidden in my house. Of course, I have to call the police. Someone must have planted them here." "Mom, I did it," he yelled. "Those are mine now. Give me." "What?" she breathed as his hands took the cast. "Don't question it, Mom. This is my future," Xander continued, returning to his old room. "Xander," Caroline called, rising from the sofa. "What did you do?" Her son deflected her questions, ripped the landline phone from its place, and locked himself in his bedroom, despite Caroline's insistence. She went to bed, worried terribly for her son and what he was involved in. They were never rich by any means. Caroline and her late husband had always been strictly middle class, but they did everything they could for Xander. The economy nowadays certainly wasn't what it used to be, but she always thought he was doing well at his corporate job. He had 3 kids and a working wife and never spoke about money problems. But those diamonds, and most of all, his attitude about them, told her that something was off. Wrong. She didn't notice when she fell asleep, but it must have been hours later when the booming sound of a car woke her up. She rose and walked to the window to see a huge SUV parked just a few houses away. Usually Caroline would ignore it and go back to bed, but a shadowing figure crossed her garden. She recognized Xander right away. Worst of all, he was carrying the cast. Her heart started beating rapidly as she saw him approach the SUV, but after exchanging a few words with the person on the passenger side, Xander began to walk backward. He was shaking his head. He had reached her yard again when 3 men exited the SUV. They were huge and dressed in black. Caroline could almost feel their thundering steps as they crossed the road and reached Xander. A scuffle began as they grappled with her son, trying to take the cast from his hands. He fought and seemed to be winning until one of the men hit his shin, and Xander bellowed horribly, falling and releasing the cast from his hands. The men ran off as soon as he was on the ground. Their tires squealed as they left. She finally stepped away from the window and ran outside. "Xander, Jesus," she said, breathless. "What happened? Who were those men?" "Mom, go back inside," Xander said, rubbing his shin. "They're no one." "Xander, what did you do? Tell me now or I will drive to the police station myself," she threatened, and he sighed, finally spilling out his guts. A month ago, he visited her because he and the other men devised a plan to steal from a local jewelry maker. They knew about a shipment of diamonds and managed to escape with the loot worth $400,000. However, they needed to hide it somewhere safe and lay low. So Xander used Caroline's old cast and went home. Their plan was to divide the diamonds between them and leave tonight, but the other men decided they didn't want to include him. "Xander?" Caroline shook her head. "Why in the world?" "I don't know, Mother, He trailed off. "Don't you have enough money? Are you struggling?" she continued, worried for real. "I have enough, it's just," Xander said, looking around. "I wanted more. I've always wanted more without having to slog my years away." "You were greedy, Xander," she nodded, closing her eyes. "It was all greed. I can't just forget about this, and those men have already betrayed you once. If they get caught, they'll implicate you, even if you don't have the diamonds anymore," Caroline continued. "We have to call the police now." Xander looked down, sniffling a little. A part of him was exhausted from hiding. He was tired of being paranoid and paralyzed with fear at every turn since the day he stole. He just wanted this burden to fall. "All right," he said quietly. Xander only spent a few months in jail thanks to his cooperation, and Caroline visited him daily. The other men were caught when they tried to pawn off the diamond states away and were sentenced to a much longer time. Unfortunately, Xander's wife was not so understanding. She divorced him and moved the kids far away to be closer to her parents. When he got out, he moved in with Caroline and tried to get back on his feet, realizing his greed had destroyed his excellent life. Tell us what you think about this story and share it with your friends. It might inspire them and brighten their day.